Hello. Welcome to today's Florida Talks with the Boca Raton Museum of Art. My name is Dwayne Smith, Adult and Community Programs Coordinator, and I am so glad that you have joined us. The program you're about to see is supported by Florida Humanities, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Florida Humanities funds and coordinates public humanities programs and publications that explore the people, places, and ideas that shape our state. In addition to this Florida Talks program, Florida Humanities provides grant funding to cultural institutions, brings traveling Smithsonian exhibits to rural and underserved communities, and publishes Forum, their award-winning magazine. Private contributions are critical to sustaining the programs of Florida Humanities. For more information on the organization and how to support it, visit floridahumanities.org. Our talk today will be followed by question and answer segment. You may send your pertinent questions via the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. Just click on the button and type in your query. This presentation is being recorded. We are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Karen Neal. Karen received her MFA from Florida International University and her PhD from Florida Atlantic University. She has taught storytelling studies at FAU since 2001. She is a Fulbright Senior Specialist and has performed and lectured in 6 countries and 10 states. She has published 5 books, including Only in Florida, which is available for purchase in our museum store. Karen appears weekly as the co-host of the South Florida public radio segment, The Public Storyteller. Dr. Neile is the past chair of the National Storytelling Network and a co-founder of the academic journal Storytelling Self-Society, published by Wayne State Press. So please now welcome Dr. Karen Neal.
Lori Martin was completely calm. She had nothing to worry about. She had lived in Estero Beach, Island, Fort Lauderdale Beach, Fort Myers Beach, for so long that the news of a hurricane coming on, the news in August 2004 that there might be a couple of days without electricity, a couple of days with too much water, didn't scare her at all. In fact, it occurred to her that at that time, if she did evacuate the island, along with her husband and her 3-year-old daughter, they would not be allowed back home, even if their house was perfectly fine, until every home on the island was secure. That would be too much money. That would be too much time away from home. They would be fine. They lived in a 2-story house between the bay and the beachfront. They had nothing to worry about. In fact, their neighbors were going to come right over and stay with them on the 2nd floor. But Lori couldn't say any of this to her mother. Her mother up north, all she could think of was, you've got a 3-year-old. What's Hannah going to do? She's going to be so scared. The wind is going to be rattling the windows and she's going to be up all night. It's going to be terrible. And what if you don't have water, you don't have electricity? Or what if worse? Don't worry, Lori told her mother on the phone. There is a mandatory evacuation order. We are leaving. But as you know, they had no intention of leaving. Well, the hurricane began to blow in, and it got a little bit more scary and a little bit more loud, and there was a little bit more rain and wind and more. And there were a couple of moments there when things were tough. But they weathered the storm perfectly. And they had a little bit of roof damage, even though it was 150-mile winds. They were fine. In the morning, they cleared out the downstairs. There was a leatherback turtle. They had to return to a fountain or a little pool nearby at a shopping center. And there was a lot of sand and a lot of muck. They had to bleach out the downstairs because they didn't want to get any mold. But Lori was fine, as was her husband, as was her daughter. Well, a couple of days passed and the cleanup was still going on. And Lori's husband decided he wanted to take a swim. Lori didn't want him to go alone. So the three of them, the next door neighbors and Lori, accompanied her husband. The swim went great. Everything was fine. And then they started walking around town. They saw smoke. They got a little closer and turned a corner, and there was a house that was just not only billowing with smoke, but there were flames licking around the entire house. And the neighbor next to that one was hosing down his home so that it wouldn't catch fire. There was nothing else to do. Because of the mandatory evacuation order, there was no way to take care of the fire. The firefighters couldn't get onto the island. Well, they kept going on their walk, and then they saw a crowd of people gathered near a canal on a dock. And as they got closer, they saw a manatee, one of those beautiful, bizarre sea creatures that the sailors used to think were mermaids. The manatee had been beached onto the road. Do you call it roaded? Came onto the road during the storm. Well, as the four friends approached, they saw that people were trying to figure out how to keep the manatee safe. Somebody ran to get help, to get some supplies, and other people somehow, they magically appeared with buckets. So all the people gathered around the manatee, ran down to the water, filled the buckets, and poured the water on the manatee, rubbing and rubbing on its skin to keep it wet, cool, comfortable. Pretty soon, the one who'd run back with his truck to his house came back with a big sheet of plywood and a rope. And everybody coaxed, they nudged that manatee onto the plywood. And somehow he was able to drive the truck out with the rope attached and bring the manatee toward the water. And the sea creature did the rest. It was a great success. In fact, it was such an amazing experience that somebody had taken a picture of them all rubbing their hands to keep the manatee cool and moist. Well, that would have been that. In fact, Lori almost forgot about the whole incident. Then a week later, when the phones were restored and everything was back to normal, she got a phone call from her mother. No hello, no how are you, just, so you started lying to your mother now. What do you mean, Mom? You didn't evacuate at all. I saw the picture in the paper. Well, Lori had to think fast. She said, there was a picture in the paper, but it was just hands. Why did you think that was me? Her mother said, I would know your hand anywhere. Lori looked down at her hand and she saw the custom-made engagement ring. The stone came from her husband's family, but the design was Portuguese gold. The setting was beautifully designed by her herself. There was only one ring like that in the world, and it was on Lori's finger. I guess I'm busted, Mom. Well, what can I say? Her mother said, look, I'm glad you're safe. I'm glad everything worked out fine. But just remember, you might be able to fool Mother Nature, but you can never fool your mother. Now, that story is from Only in Florida. Why did the manatee cross the road? It is my collection of 34 stories from people throughout the state that they told me either in person or on the phone, and I retold. I've got to tell you that it's a fun book, and it is in the best museum gift shop I've ever been to, the Boca Raton Museum gift shop. And it was an amazing experience dealing with all of these outside, raw, unschooled by the establishment storytellers, everyday storytelling. Because storytelling is really outsider art par excellence. And this talk today is connected to the wonderful exhibition at the library, An Irresistible Urge to Create, the outsider art collection of Gary Monroe. And the reason I'm here is I am not a visual artist, but I am always working with people to tell their stories. If you get to see the beautiful catalog, which is also in the Great Art Museum, you will see a quote. And the quote reads as follows. It's from Jean Buffet, who is the co-founder of Art Brut, or raw art, otherwise known as outsider art, a movement that began in France. And the line that he says that struck me so perfectly for storytelling is this: art's best moments are when it forgets what its name is. That describes not only outsider art that is created by people who don't necessarily consider themselves artists, but also by folk art. Folk art and outsider art, they conflate a little bit. Folk art mainly being we don't always know who the artist is. Even with outsider art, not all of the pieces are signed. In folk art, virtually not at all. Sometimes, but virtually not at all. They take the traditions, just like with folk tales, folk narratives, myths, legends. They take the traditions from their culture, whatever that may be, and they put their own little spin on it. Now, we tend to think of artists as others. We're not artists, they are artists. We don't know how to create art. Somebody just told me, I don't understand what you're talking about because everybody's a storyteller, but not everybody is an artist. And I am here to tell you, and my dad was a very much trained art teacher. I'm here to tell you that when we express our emotions, our experiences, our observations, simply for our own sake, simply because we have an irresistible urge to create, we are artists. And as I said, according to the catalog as well, few of these outsider artists consider themselves as such. But just like when they create their art, their sculpture or their paintings or whatever, their drawings or whatever, they don't necessarily consider themselves artists. Many people who tell stories don't necessarily consider themselves storytellers. And yet we do it every day. We are all storytellers. Think about you come home from work. Hey, honey, how was your day? Or you get off Zoom. Hey, honey, how did it go? Or think about telling about that trip you took, or when your summer vacation, or what's new with you. We are always telling stories. The communication scholar Walter Fisher went so far as to call the human being, Homo sapiens, Homo narrans, a storytelling animal, as opposed to a conscious animal, a storytelling animal. In fact, you could say that the main difference between human beings and other animals is our irresistible urge to tell stories, whether it is stories of ourselves and our own experiences, stories of others, stories that we've heard, etc. Yet, as you heard from Dwayne, when I do the public storyteller on WLRN, I collect stories from people all over South Florida. I can't tell you how many people have said, "Oh, I'm not a storyteller. Oh, I can't do this. Oh, so and so, he works in an emergency department. He's got a much better story. So and so, she's got foster children. She's got a much better." I'll tell you, we all have stories and we all are storytellers. The problem is, perhaps, or the challenge is, we all started out as outsider storytellers. And then we got more schooled in how you write and how you present in public speaking, in what is appropriate to do and what is not appropriate to do. And we think, I can't do this. I can't do this right. There are people who really know how to do it. Well, in fact, I am going to show you another of the stories that was told to me by a wonderful storyteller. This one I'm going to read. The publisher asked me, unlike on the public storyteller where I take stories themselves, the publisher asked me to retell the stories in my words. But this was a wonderful story that was told to me. When Dr. Bill Trapani moved his small family to Florida from Detroit in 2009, he was looking forward to more than a change in university faculty positions. He was conscious of relocating from the car-centric city he had lived in as a younger man to a more active lifestyle. Just one look at the perky seniors race walking through the malls convinced him that he was in a whole different world. Sure, Florida's nickname is the Sunshine State, but for him, it looked more like the Slim Down State. Not that everybody here was exactly pinup material, but most of the folks he saw looked a whole lot better than he knew he did. He had struggled with his weight most of his life, yo-yoing up and down the scale, mostly down while in grad school. But now, weighing in at about 335 pounds, he had reached a new personal record. And man, was he uncomfortable lugging all that weight around the humid Florida parking lots. Hardest of all, at his present weight, he was caring for his 2-year-old daughter, Ellie. Sure, she had a mom, but she also wanted daddy to go to the park. She wanted daddy to help her ride a tricycle. She wanted daddy to play. Unfortunately, keeping up with her was tougher for Bill than defending his doctoral dissertation had been. It felt more like winning the Nobel Prize twice. Speaking of which, have you noticed they grow Harry Potter fans younger and younger these days? He barely realized his daughter could read when he realized that she had somehow gotten into Harry Potter in a big way. The books were just a small part, of course. There were the movies, the action figures, the bed sheets and pajamas, and yes, the ride at Universal Studios in Orlando. Ellie Trapani was about 6 when the theme park installed the Harry Potter rides, and hers was one of the first families to visit it. At the time, however, she was too short to go on the ride she really wanted, Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, a roller coaster with an unobstructed view of Hogwarts Castle. No fan of the boy wizard himself, Bill remembers all this as if it were yesterday because, well, his daughter wouldn't stop talking about it. He even looked it up online. He learned that the Forbidden Journey is not technically a roller coaster ride. By way of special robo-coaster technology, the seats on the scenic dark ride swivel above the track, held in place by a robotic arm. Only a tech wizard could make that up, he reflected. At last, Ellie announced to her parents that she had reached the posted height requirement of 48 inches. She had long ago learned the magic number, and the Trapanis had, in fact, more than once used it as an incentive to induce her to eat a more balanced diet. Parents will use anything. If all else failed, she told them the night before the big trip, she would tease up her hair a little bit. Whatever it took, she was determined to make it work and fit on that ride. Besides, she assured her dad before drifting off to sleep that night, I'll be taller tomorrow. The morning of the big adventure arrived. Bill kissed his wife goodbye at the door. Then he turned to his little girl. Okay, he said, let's do it. They made the 3-hour drive in good time. But as any denizen of Disney knows, it's the line that takes patience. Universal was no different. Finally, they were about 10 minutes from the front. Even Bill could feel his anticipation rising. He felt the little hand squeezing his pinky finger for all it was worth. It was then that a young attendant approached him. The kid couldn't have been more than 18, and he seemed to wear his authority with as much discomfort as he did his uniform. Excuse me, sir, he said. Would you come over here for a minute? Bill didn't want to lose his hard-won place in line, but the guy was pointing to a chair that looked like the replica of one that might be on the ride. He looked down at Ellie. She looked up at him. At the same time, they shrugged. Sure, he said, and he thought to himself, must be they want a funny picture. I'll bet they pull every 1,000th tourist out of the line and give him a souvenir. Then he realized what was happening. Like his daughter had experienced before, he was being measured for the ride. But far from trying to stretch to fit, he found himself desperately trying to pull the bar down over his belly. The more he tried, the more of a challenge it became. He simply could not tuck himself in, no matter how he squirmed. Bill felt a familiar rivulet of sweat snake down his brow. But this time, it wasn't from the Florida heat. He felt his heart began to pound with embarrassment. At last, the attendant spoke up. I'm really sorry, sir, he said, shaking his head, but you can't go on the ride if you can't pull down the safety bar. It's the law. Bill climbed out of the chair and reached for his daughter's hand. Clearly, she didn't understand. Why were they leaving the line when they had stood there for so long and gotten so close to the front? What was going on? When they were well away from the ride, Bill knelt down beside his little girl. Honey, he said, you fit into the ride now, but Daddy doesn't. I'm too big. She didn't miss a beat. Can I go on myself? Sorry, no. But we'll come again when I lose some weight. I promise, baby. We'll come again really, really soon. Don't worry, the story's not over. The drive home felt like the longest of his life. Neither father nor daughter talked a lot. They had tried a few other attractions at the park, but neither of them had the heart for them. And when it came to lunch, Bill, ironically perhaps, had no appetite. He was devastated. It was one thing to have fellow passengers look at him with fear when he approached them on their seat on a plane, or just as bad to appear invisible to women. He'd come to terms with who he was and what he looked like, and it had never bothered him too much. But to see himself in his daughter's eyes and to disappoint her like that was a whole different experience. This was true motivation to change. There was no Harry Potter magic to what Bill did next. He dieted. He walked. He attended Weight Watchers meetings and made a good friend with whom he regularly went on hikes. By the following year, Bill had lost 130 pounds. Once again, father and daughter drove to Universal Studios. They rode the Harry Potter ride twice. After the second go-round, Ellie looked up at him and smiled. "I'm really proud of you, Dad," she said. He squeezed her shoulder. "I'm always proud of you, honey." After that, they each bought an ice cream. "We can have this, right, Daddy?" she asked, holding up her chocolate cone. "We absolutely can," Bill assured her. "We can have anything we want." And that story I titled Harry Potter and the Loving Father. Now, was that story going to be made into a major motion picture? I probably could have, or could have been a part of one, but that wasn't what interested me in it. And in this book, I have a number of stories, maybe 5 or 6, that come from the radio show I do, because all I ask people for is something memorable that happened to you in Florida. For the book, I wanted something that was absolutely Florida, right? Like Universal Studios, exactly. But my point here is that everybody has stories like this. What people may not necessarily have is the confidence or the memory. You used to do it, I'll bet. I'll wager when you were at Ellie's age, to organize the story into a way that will interest somebody, to get really excited about the story in a way that will interest the audience and have them get excited about it as well. Think about that title, Irresistible Urge to Create. When you come home from work, or when you just win the lottery, or when you just meet a new significant other, or lose X number of pounds, or anything else, it's very common to have an irresistible urge to communicate that. And storytelling is an everyday art form. That's really what it is. Now, professional storytellers tell our own stories that we craft very carefully. We tell folk tales, folk narratives. I mentioned a few before. Fairy tales are a type of folk tale, which is just stories that have been passed along generation to generation. No author. When you see a book of folk tales, it has a name, but that's either the editor or the person who retold the story, like I retold these people's stories. We also have myths and legends and different types of folk narrative. If you want to create your own art, your own outsider art, and you're not comfortable, or you don't have that irresistible urge to create with your own hands, to make something with paint or something with paper or something with ceramics or anything else, you can still be a raw artist, an outsider artist, by simply telling your own story. Now, that term outsider artist is what in the academy we call a vexed term or fraught term. What does it exactly mean? Well, originally it was thought that outsider artists were people who had mental or emotional issues, people who, for one reason or another, were not able to work in the same way. Maybe they had physical issues, maybe they were blind, or maybe they couldn't use their hands to create, something like that. It also means people who were just simply unschooled in their art form. I mentioned earlier that my father was an art teacher. He was a painter. He went to an art school, and he did all kinds of training, took all kinds of training to be an artist. And I'll tell you that when I looked through this amazing catalog, and when I've been to exhibits and seen what people do who never went through the rigor of the academy, it reminds me that I may be an academic, but I don't have all the answers, and neither does anybody who teaches. We can dance at a party beautifully. We may never have had dance lessons, but we are expressing ourselves. Are we going to be on a stage with the Bolshoi Ballet? Possibly not. If we sing in the shower and enjoy our singing, and then we can sing together with friends, are we going to be in the Metropolitan Opera? Most likely not. But that's not what art is about. When I talk to people who want to tell their stories and they say, I just have nothing to say, nothing happens to me, I begin to brainstorm with them. I say, do you have an embarrassing moment? Or perhaps the first time, that's always a good thing. The first time I saw my husband, the first time I dated, the first time I was kissed, the first time my first job, my first time on a stage, my first bicycle ride, or, my first trip to wherever. And very often those involve stories. Now, one of the ways to get a story to sound like Bill's story is to remember that stories in our tradition, in the Western tradition, there's all kinds of different traditions of stories, but stories in our tradition have a 3-part structure. A joke has a 2-part structure. It's the setup, it's the punchline. But a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the beginning, we're just setting things up. I told who Bill was. I told where Bill was. I told what mattered to Bill, right? That's the stasis. That's where we are at the beginning. The middle is the problem. I don't mean it has to be a crisis. You may not be an international spy or anything like it. But we all have questions, have itches that need to be scratched, have concerns, have little problems that we face. And it is how we deal with those problems. Maybe the first time we can't solve it. Maybe the second time we can't solve it. Maybe the third time, wow, we came through. And that's the third part of storytelling, the solution to the problem. The more surprising it is, the more unusual it is, the more interesting a story it is. The more interesting language you use, the more affect, the more emotion you use, the more interesting story it is. And finally, the last thing we're looking for in a story is what we're looking for in any art, whether it's the beautiful outsider art that hangs on the walls of the Boca Raton Museum or anywhere else. We are looking to be moved. We are looking to be transformed in some way. The artist was transformed. The materials of that art were transformed. And the viewer or the listener, let's just use a general term, the audience was transformed. That's what art is about. So if you give me an itinerary of your trip, yeah, okay, that and that and that, you went there and you went there and you went there. But if you tell me that you lost your passport and you looked all over for it and you had to get on the plane and it wasn't until the very last second that you looked in the last possible pocket for the 10th time and you found it, there's a story, right? So we all have these moments. If you can put the elements of your story in any order, it's probably not a story. A story tells us that life is a matter of one thing after the other, of cause and effect. Our actions have consequences. So that's how we know whether a story is useful for us. That's how we know if it's going to change anybody listening to it. That's how we know if it's going to have what we might call legs. Is it going to be told and retold? And maybe they'll forget who you are living the story, but the story, the feeling that comes from it, and their entertainment value or the knowledge that comes from it, that lives on. There are many ways to share your stories, to share your own outsider art. There are story circles at libraries. You can create your own in your community and in whatever group you're in or among your friends, where people meet like a book club, maybe on Zoom or someday in person. And maybe you have a theme and everybody gets to think about the theme ahead of time and has 5 minutes to share a story from their lives on that theme, to be truly listened to. Just like when you stand and look at a work of art, you are truly engaged with it. You want to truly engage with the story. There are story slams. I run one every month. I've done it for about 16, 17 years. Most recently, I've been doing it through the Boca Raton Library. You are welcome to get on their website and register. And then you might even win a prize. You're telling stories to strangers. It's a very, very friendly setting. And people love getting to know each other. They make friends. They learn new things. They have a great time. And there is the public storyteller. And if you want to tell a story to me so that I can put it on the air, I won't retell it. I will record it. You can either record it yourself on your phone, your own story, and then I will take the recording and we will record, my co-host Michael Stock and I will record the story and make it into a package. We put it on not only on the radio for anybody who wants to hear, the 4,000 people who are in South Florida and who are members, but and who listen to that show. I should say there are many more who are members, but the 4,000 who listen to that show Sundays at 4. And then it will also be on their website, so you can link to it. Anybody can hear your story at any time. The most important thing when you're telling stories, look people in the eyes. Bring your emotion, bring your best game. If you live that story, don't concentrate so much on your words, play the movie in your head, then you will not sound like an amateur. We're all amateurs in life, right? We're all amateurs when we tell stories, right? And yet our stories are of professional quality. Listen, be listened to. I'd love to take a few questions before I finish up, Dwayne.
Oh, wonderful, Karen. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking us on this journey. I actually had a question earlier where somebody said, I believe I have a good story. How can I have a professional storyteller give me feedback?
Oh, well, professional storytellers coach people. And that's one way we do it. And you're welcome to contact me. I think the best thing would be to give you my email, or the museum can give you my email. It's C. Neile, N as in Nancy, EILE at FAU.edu. C. Neile at fau.edu, and I can tell you about it. There are classes all over the country, all over the world. About 200 universities in this country alone have storytelling classes. And unfortunately, mine are requirements for students in the School of Communication at FAU. So thank you so much for doing that, Dwayne. So it is not possible for the public unless you are matriculated. It's very, very difficult for you to take a storytelling class, but I do them for the library from time to time, and we'll hopefully be doing that again, free classes. We'll hopefully be doing that again very, very soon in person. There are many people who can help you, and I'm very happy to walk you through that process. But essentially, what happens is a storyteller, you yourself, the questioner, will tell the story, and then I would give feedback in a very positive way, 3-part feedback I would give, asking you questions, giving you suggestions, and most importantly, telling you what worked. Because so often with art, particularly with art, but also in almost anything we do, we're told what doesn't work, what you got to fix, what's wrong with you. Whereas this process is a whole different way around when it comes to coaching. It's very beautiful. I didn't come up with it myself. A great storyteller named Doug Littman did it. It gives people all the confidence and yet all the advice, all the assistance that they need, while not saying, I know best, I'm the expert, I'm the only one who knows how to tell your story. Because just like with these outsider artists, we all know how to tell our stories.
Nice. Great information. We also had a question of, do you have a website where I can find more out about your books?
I do, although I strongly recommend you go to the museum gift shop, but you'll get all your gifts for Christmas as well, Hanukkah as well. But yes, I do. It's KarenNeal.com. KarenNeile.com. And I will tell you that the book I did for this publisher, History Press, before this one, is called Florida Lore, and it is legends and folk tales and a couple of myths from all over Florida, including from immigrants to Florida, large immigrant populations in Florida. And I will be closing with a story from that book.
Very nice. And one other person earlier asked about getting onto the public storyteller program, but I think you covered that in your talk. If you want to tell us anything else about the public storyteller program or anything like that, it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Great question, as they all are. I think the simplest way to do this is to send me an email. What you do not need to worry about is giving me a complete rundown of the story. I prefer when people don't write it. Between you and me, let's not let this go beyond our Zoom group. Between you and me, the worst people on the public storyteller, the 500 plus storytellers we've had in 11 years, the worst storytellers are writers. And the reason is they have to get every word perfect. So we've had very well-known award-winning writers who couldn't do it because they had to have a script in front of them to read. Now, I read you something from a book for a reason, but you got to be able to tell a story, as far as I'm concerned, if you're a human being. And we know these people could do it, but it wasn't going to be letter perfect. You do not need to be letter perfect. You get edited. Just send me, if you would like, a very simple summary, a 2-sentence summary of your story, but you don't even need to do that. All you need to do is ask me for instructions. I will send you one very simple page of instructions. Record the story on your phone. We used to have people come down to the studio, or I would meet people. Now, for obvious reasons, record it on your phone, on your audio record. Send me the audio file by email or text. I will listen to it. If I've got any questions, I might ask you to just add a line. I won't ask you normally to redo the whole story. I might ask you to just add a line in there, and that will be it. And or I'll say, you might want to try this a different way, but that's very unusual. Usually the story's just fine. We just might need a little extra information. And then we will record the segment, not with you. I will record the segment with Michael Stock, and I will let you know when it airs. That's it. Simple as that.
Very nice. Well, I think that covers our questions, but I know that we would love to possibly hear another story.
And I would love to tell you one. This story is an old Florida folk tale called The Education of Epaminondas. Epaminondas actually was a general 1,000 years ago. For some reason, this story, which is from Cracker folklore, uses the name Epaminondas. By the way, I need to tell you, cracker, in case you're not aware, is not a derogatory term. It is the name for a culture of people from Celtic or Welsh or other English British origin. And they have been in this area maybe 5 or 6 generations. But it was very important to me for that book, Florida Lore, to include folklore from other places as well. From the people came from Haiti, from Jamaica, from Cuba, from many other places as well. But cracker folklore is definitely a big part of our culture. This story, like all folk narrative, has been told in many, many ways. Not always as the education of Epaminondas, not always with the exact details that I am using. The beautiful thing about folk narrative is that anybody can take the folk tale and tell it their own way. And in a different culture, they may use different clothing, they may use different names, they may use different items, different elements, but the feelings behind the story, the problem solution, the emotions, the transformation, it's all the same wherever we are, all over the world. So the education of Epaminondas. Epaminondas loved his mommy. He loved his granny. So when his mommy baked a cake, a beautiful cake with buttercream frosting, and told him to take it to Granny, he was very happy to do it. She said, now don't drop it. So he took that cake and he held it as close as he can. And he went to Grandma's house. And when he got there and held out the cake to Grandma, she said, Epaminondas, that's disgusting. It's just crumbs and mush. The next time you have something like that, put it on your head. Yes, Granny. And he went back home. Well, the following week, Epaminondas's mommy churned fresh butter. She gave some to Epaminondas, and she said, take this over to Granny and be very careful that you don't drop it. Well, he remembered what his granny said. He said, yes, Mommy. He loved his mommy. He loved his granny. He took that butter and he did exactly what she had told him the week before. He put it on his head and he tramped through the Florida sun and heat and sand, got to Granny's. And by the time she opened the door, that butter had melted all over him. She said, Epaminondas, you foolish boy. The next time you have something like that, take some leaves, go to the stream, get them all nice and cold, wrap up the thing in the leaves, and bring it that way. Oh, yes, Granny. Well, he went home to his mother. Now, the following week, his mother's litter of puppies were ready to be adopted. So she gave one of those puppies to Epaminondas. Now, when she did, she said, be very, very careful. Don't drop him. Yes, Mommy. Now, Epaminondas remembered what his granny had said the week before. So he took the puppy down to the stream. He wrapped it in some wet leaves and he carried that puppy as far as he could. He couldn't carry the puppy all the way to Granny's house. That was for sure, because that puppy ran away as fast as she could. By the time he got to Granny's house, he was empty-handed. She took one look at him and said, oh, Epaminondas, you foolish boy. The next time you have something like that, take a rope, wrap it around, tie it just tight enough, and drag it behind you. Yes, Granny. Well, the following week, Epaminondas's mommy made bread. wonderful, sweet-smelling bread. She said, Epaminondas, I want you to take this to Granny, and please be very careful. Don't drop it. Now, Epaminondas loved his mommy and he loved his granny, and he remembered what Granny had told him the week before. He got a rope, he wrapped it around the bread, you're way ahead of me, and he dragged it behind him. And by the time he got to Granny's, what a surprise. She opened the door, there was no bread. Oh, Epaminondas, you foolish boy. Don't bring anything to me again. Just forget it. Yes, Granny. Well, the following week, Epaminondas's mom made cherry pies, 6 cherry pies. She said, look, I'm putting them on the steps to cool. You don't need to take them anywhere. I'm going to the market. If you leave the house, be very careful where you step. I don't want anything to happen to them. I want to give one to Granny, but I'll do it myself. Yes, Mommy. Now, Epaminondas loved his mother. He loved his grandmother. He wanted to be very careful where he stepped when he went outside. So very carefully, he put a foot in each of those pies. And that was the last anybody heard of Epaminondas. Now, when I tell that story, I always think Epaminondas was foolish, right? But his mother, what was she thinking? I don't know. I don't know where she was going with that or why she didn't learn. Anyway, folk tales are a different kind of outsider art. Folk tales, by definition, any kind of folk art, any kind of costumes that people wear that are found in their culture, any kinds of foods that we eat that are found in our culture, any kinds of dances or songs. These are examples of folk art. These belong to us. In the same way that I cringed when my friend said, well, everybody may be a storyteller, but everybody's not an artist. I will tell you, not only is everybody a storyteller, but everybody is an artist. And I hope that this presentation has not only inspired you to tell your own stories, but maybe, just maybe, the next time there's an exhibition in the Boca Raton Museum of Art of Outsider Art, maybe your art will be exhibited there as well. Have a wonderful evening, and I hope all of your stories have happy endings.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Neal, for this comprehensive and engaging talk and really taking us on this journey through storytelling. I want to make sure we thank all of our museum staff and all of the people with Florida Humanities, and thank you for all of the support. So this concludes our Florida Talks this evening. So please consider renewing your museum membership, gifting a membership, or making a donation. And remember to check out the events page at bocamuseum.org to sign up for any of our many other programs. We appreciate your participation this evening. Thank you.